So look at what it says here. Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting occurred on June 24th, 1947, when private pilot Kenneth Arnold claimed that he saw a string of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects flying past Mount Rainier at speeds that Arnold estimated at a minimum of 1,200 miles an hour.
So it's like something's crashed through it.
Some sort of aircraft, potentially, or an explosion.
All at the same level, as though something's come down right through them, snap them.
It could potentially be wind damage.
Normally when the trees come down in the wind, they come down from the roots,
yeah.
And they've got a big root.
Do you believe in alien life? Do you think time travel is possible? Well, whether yes or no, you will judge that. But a man named Morris Jessup got caught up on the web of research on unidentified flying objects, such as UFOs. On a quiet night in 1959, he was found dead in his car under strange circumstances.
It's my opinion that these craters were made at the time when the continent of Atlantis was destroyed, and that the entire Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico area results from an impact of either a large group of objects from space or from a comet, and that this physical evidence which I am uncovering in and near Mexico and around the Caribbean Gulf of Mexico area.
Was it a case where he ended his life, or something far more sinister, considering the theories and propaganda surrounding UFOs? If you want to know, grab a seat and let's dive into it. Who was Morris Jessup? Morris Jessup, an American ufologist and astronomer, was born on March 2, 1900. Not much detail is known of Jessup's life before he emerged as one of the early writers on UFOs, mainly because nobody has taken the trouble to do the necessary research. Probably the most that ufology knows about him prior to his involvement with flying saucers is contained on the jacket flap of his first book. However, some research shows that he was born near Rockville, Indiana, where he grew up. He was smart, good with science, and developed an interest in astronomy. Apart from what was written on the jacket flap of his first book, one classmate of his at Indiana High School wrote to Gray Barker in 1968, giving a reasonable insight into the kind of family he grew up in and how his peers perceived him. From this account, we know that he had a sister, and his family was middle class. At school, Jessup was the brain who made excellent grades and was the pet of the teachers who forecasted a bright future for him. Let me also tell you that he was disgustingly snobbish, especially to the less brilliant and poorer members of the school. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Astronomy from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1925. He then got a job at the Lamont Hussey Observatory, and while he was working there, he decided to pursue a Master of Science degree in astronomy, which he earned in 1926. He is sometimes erroneously described as having been an instructor in astronomy and mathematics at the University of Michigan and Drake University. However, in 1971, following a series of questions sent to the University of Michigan by Gary Barker as regards the role he took at the university, in response to the questions, noted that Jessup at no time held an appointment at the level of an instructor or higher, but held several subordinate positions with the Department of Astronomy at the university. These positions involved him supervising laboratory sections of undergraduate students, and he was employed at the university as an observing assistant from 1927 to 1930, during which he enrolled for a master's degree. Additionally, the jacket copy of his first book notes that Jessup completed his thesis for a doctorate in astrophysics at the University of Michigan, although it does not specify whether the degree was actually awarded. In academic circles, the completion of a thesis is typically the final step in obtaining a doctorate. Some doctoral candidates are referred to as doctor by their peers, even if they have not officially received the degree. This seems to be the case with Jessup, who was often addressed as Dr. Jessup, although he never used the title in his correspondence or on the covers or title pages of his 4 books. Likely, Jessup was never formally awarded the degree. During this period, Jessup worked at the Lamont Hussey Observatory under Professor Richard Rossiter, who was responsible for setting up and operating the largest refracting telescope in South Africa for the University of Michigan. Jessup was in charge of operating this equipment. He was also involved in research for the Carnegie Institute and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So why didn't he complete his PhD program? A faculty member who wrote to Gray Barker in 1979 stated that it had something to do with his attitude. He mentioned that Jessup wanted to install himself as the head of the observatory. Also, he had trouble with his superior, Professor Richard, as he found it difficult to know who was the boss. He also had trouble with graduate school, which stemmed from his unwillingness to follow the laid-down regulations. In fact, among other graduate students and the faculty, he was always known for his outbursts of temper that verged on the insane. So, how did he become popular in the world of UFO research? Let's find out. His influence on UFO research. Jessup has been referred to in ufological circles as probably the most original extraterrestrial hypothesizer of the 1950s, and it has been said of him that he was educated in astronomy and archaeology and had working experience in both. However, actual evidence of an educational background in archaeology or archaeological fieldwork is absent from Jessup's resume. Jerome Clark, an American writer who specializes in unidentified flying objects and other paranormal subjects, reports that Jessup took part in archaeological expeditions to the Yucatan in Mexico and Peru in the 1920s. Jessup documented an expedition to Cusco that he participated in during 1930. None of these expeditions were conducted under the umbrella of the University of Michigan. In 1923, however, Jessup, along with University of Michigan botanist Carl D. LaRue and plant pathologist James Weir, participated as a photographer in a U.S. Department of Agriculture expedition to Brazil to study the possibility of growing rubber in the Amazon. With his background in astronomy, Jessup became interested in UFOs, corresponding with figures like Gary Barker and others. His interest in UFOs developed in the wake of strange aerial crafts reported on June 24, 1947, when businessman Kenneth Arnold was flying his private airplane over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. Arnold described a chain of 9 objects, each flying with a motion like a saucer skipped across the water, and mythology burgeoned. By the 1950s, theories about extraterrestrials and flying saucers, later unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, proliferated. Within a few years, beginning in 1955, Jessup had written 4 UFO books: The Case for the UFO in 1955, UFOs in the Bible, and the UFO Annual, both in 1956, and finally, in 1957, The Expanding Case for the UFO. Yes, 4 books that are some of the most controversial books of the 1950s. As part of the Faded Discs collection of UFO history and UFO audio history on the Internet Archive, originally collected and curated by Wendy Connors, there is a brief 2-minute clip of Morris Jessup talking about science. So, if you want to hear the voice of the man we are discussing, listen to his speech.
It certainly is true that all through the 20th century, and perhaps slightly before the beginning of the 20th century, that science has been running ahead of the man in the street. And in the past, the past 30 years, this gap has been widening very seriously, and in the past 10 years, it's been widening at a very alarming rate. Of course, it's been said that Isaac Newton was the last human being who would ever know all the science of his time, and that was probably seems that once if you try to talk about slowing science up, immediately everybody screams that you're impeding progress, and maybe they're right, but I think sometimes we're confusing change with progress and don't actually know that we aren't truly progressing. It's certainly true that science has set up a vast framework of the material or purely mechanical phases of the world we live in, and as far as science has gone, it has pretty much proved its points and consolidated its gains. But science is just as bigoted today and just as arrogant as the church was in the Dark and Middle Ages, and where the church overlooked what most of us consider to be reality. Science is in turn overlooking all of the, or nearly all of the spiritual values, and I think both of them have missed the boat.
In summary, Jessup said in that short clip that science is not quite getting the job done. In his book, The Case for the UFO, he examined the subject in a very serious way, with extensive scientific discussion, particularly about the forces and technology that might be powering UFOs, as well as how such forces could be used to address humanity's energy concerns. He talked about how UFOs fly, their energy source, and what makes them move so swiftly and carry out very sophisticated aerobatics, such as sudden stops, fast straight twists, and so on. He further speculated that UFOs are exploratory crafts of solid and nebulous character. He was also the first to link ancient monuments with prehistoric superscience. He was also the first to state that good and bad groups of space aliens publicly were and are meddling with terrestrial affairs. In addition, Jessup discussed weather anomalies, including things falling from the sky, reminiscent of the works of Charles Fort. He also explored the connections between UFO theories and ancient history, megaliths, and similar topics. He raised the age-old question: how could ancient civilizations move such massive rocks without modern technology? He suggested they might have used levitation devices, an idea that predated the popular ancient aliens theories. Many websites claim that Jessup discussed Einstein's unified field theory in The Case for the UFO, but he did not. However, he did talk about it in other articles, and increasingly during 1955 public lectures, even urging people to contact their government representatives to fund research into the unified field theory. As presented in Charles Berlitz's and William L. Moore's seminal book, The Philadelphia Experiment, Jessup stated, "If the money, thought, time, and energy now being poured uselessly into the development of rocket propulsion were invested in a basic study of gravity, beginning perhaps with continued research into Dr. Einstein's unified field concepts, it is altogether likely that we could have effective and economical space travel at a small fraction of the costs we are now incurring within the next decade." These statements caught the attention of a man calling himself Carl M. Allen, an ex-merchant marine, who wrote in January 1956 to the U.S. Navy and Jessup about the Philadelphia Experiment. We will talk about this later. In his letter, Allen noted that it was unnecessary to urge the public to pressure their representatives to pass a law requiring research into Dr. Albert Einstein's unified field theory. According to Allen, Dr. Einstein's decision to retract his work was influenced more by humantics than by mathematics. His later calculations, which focused on the cycles of human civilization and progress, as well as humanity's overall growth, were unsettling to him. As a result, it is now understood that the theory was incomplete. This was not the only controversy that the supposed doctor propagated. Let's review some of the other propaganda that he put forward. Jessup's research and the controversies.
I hear you're back from Mexico.
Yes, I've been back about 6 weeks. I had a very interesting trip down there. I was able to work with the Mexican government and had access to 1 million photographs taken from the air over Mexico.
Remember I told you about his trip to Mexico? In the events that followed, he was interviewed about this trip. In response, he noted that he was able to work with the Mexican government and had access to 1 million photographs taken from the air over Mexico. From there, he found at least 15 extraterrestrial craters and possibly several others, although the others were too small to verify from photographs taken at high altitudes. The ones he claimed to have studied in detail were very large, with the biggest one being about 1.5 miles across and the smallest about 600 to 800 yards. He opined that he was quite convinced this group of craters was made by something arriving on Earth from space. Since geologists told him meteors may not have made them, he looked for other causes. In his opinion, these craters were created at the time when the continent of Atlantis was destroyed, and the entire Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico resulted from the impact of this large group of objects from space, or possibly a comet.
It's my opinion that these craters were made at the time when the continent of Atlantis was destroyed, and that the entire Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico area results from an impact of either a large group of objects from space or from a comet, and that this physical evidence which I am uncovering in and near Mexico and around the Caribbean Gulf of Mexico area.
This physical evidence, which he uncovered in and near Mexico and around the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, represented the remains and results of the cataclysm Immanuel Velikovsky outlined in his 3 books. At the time of the interview, Jessup was preparing to launch his 2nd book about UFOs in the Bible. He explained that the book was more analytical than anything else. He said, "In the introduction, it was very difficult to present a problem of such magnitude, or even to outline a problem of such magnitude in a short little book like this. In fact, this book was written as a chapter in the expanding case for the UFO, which will probably be out in September or October. But the publishers liked the little story about the Bible so well that they decided to lift it out and make a separate book of it. So I wrote the introduction after they had done that." He continued by saying, "Actually, I have not tried to cover the so-called classic Bible references such as Ezekiel's wheel, or the taking of Elijah to heaven in a private chariot, or whatever it may have been. Instead, I have taken a more philosophical view and tried to interpret the spirit of what the Bible conveys to us, rather than set the stage for what is to come. I have selected as a text, if I may use the preacher's term, the 13th chapter of St. Mark. It seemed to me to cover, in very brief form, almost all possible phases of UFO and spacelife activity, and I view this as a cross-section and just a sort of preparation for other work. In fact, I'm continuing this work right now." He also noted that he became so engrossed and immersed in the subject that he basically became a slave to it. In his words, he said, "It's a little hard to explain, but once you get into it, you recognize the length, breadth, and depth of it to a point where it is not only amazing, but perhaps appalling as well." However, the chief controversy was the Philadelphia incident, which involved the alleged disappearance of the U.S. Navy ship. How was he involved? Sit tight, and let's dive into it. The Philadelphia Experiment Connection.
In Virginia, some people witnessed the ship appear there and vanish there as well. So what is going on here?
In October of 1943, a U.S. Navy destroyer was supposedly turned invisible and teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk. But did it really happen? The newly commissioned destroyer, USS Eldridge, in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, was being outfitted with several intriguing devices. These included top-secret generators that were said to be capable of making the ship completely invisible to the enemy. As the final generators were put into place, the crew readied themselves for what was believed to be the breakthrough of the century. The system test began. There, in broad daylight, on a clear summer's day, in the middle of the shipyard, the generators were switched on, and a greenish-blue glow surrounded the ship. Right before the crew's eyes, the ship disappeared entirely. Witnesses in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia reported seeing the Eldridge appear in their waters before it vanished just as quickly. Hours later, it reappeared back in Philadelphia. However, the crew members aboard the ship reported nausea, insanity, and burn marks. Others claimed to have been embedded within the metal structure of the ship, having fallen through floors or walls during the time it was missing. Some even claimed to have rematerialized inside out, or not at all. There were different stories. The only problem with this tale, according to prevailing wisdom, is that it never actually happened. The story of the Philadelphia experiment, however, has persisted for decades, despite the fact that much of what is known is pure conjecture. Of the hundreds of stories and details that have circulated over the years, only a few things are known for certain. One of these is that Jessup, the astronomer specializing in UFO propulsion stories, received a letter from Carlos Allen, whom we discussed earlier. Allen claimed to have witnessed a secret experiment in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Allen asserted that he was aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth in Philadelphia in 1943 when he witnessed the naval ship USS Eldridge become invisible, reappear in Virginia, disappear again, and then reappear in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He claimed to have served as a deckhand on the ship. He also declared that the experiment was proof of Einstein's unified field theory, which Allen claimed he had learned from the theory itself. Jessup attempted to investigate Allen's incredulous claims, but could not find any physical evidence to support them. Eventually, he dismissed Allen as a fool. The story might have ended there, but in 1957, Jessup was contacted by the Office of Naval Research, ONR, with a strange report. Remember, I also mentioned that Allen had sent letters to the U.S. Navy. Allen marked the package Happy Easter. They informed Jessup that they had received a copy of his book, The Case for the UFO, which detailed how UFOs might be able to fly. The book was annotated with notes in 3 different handwritings, one of which supposedly belonged to an alien. These notes claimed to reveal an advanced understanding of physics and extraterrestrial technology. The book's margins were filled with handwritten notes in 3 different shades of blue ink, suggesting a debate among 3 individuals, only one of whom was named Jemmy. They commented on Jessup's ideas about UFO propulsion, discussed alien races, and expressed concern that Jessup was getting too close to discovering their technology. The uncommon use of capitalization and punctuation led experts to suspect that the annotator was not a native English speaker. In 1957, Jessup was invited to the ONR, where he was shown the annotated copy of his book. Jessup noticed that the handwriting resembled the letters he had received from Allen. Jessup himself believed that the annotations were the work of Allen, the mysterious letter writer. The annotators discussed the merits of Jessup's claims and referenced the Philadelphia experiment multiple times. For reasons that remain unclear, the ONR decided to publish 127 copies of the annotated book, which were dubbed the Varro editions, after their publisher, Varro Manufacturing. Thus, the story of the Philadelphia experiment was given new life. The fact that Carlos Allen seemed to be the only witness to such a large-scale event initially deterred most right-minded people from believing the story. However, in 1988, Allen was joined by another witness.
First thing they found was 2 sailors buried in the steel deck. The bodies were literally buried in the steel, dying or near dead. 2 more were found standing upright in a bulkhead, also buried in the steel. 5th man with his hand buried in the steel up to his wrist.
A man named Al Bialik came forward in 1988, 4 years after Hollywood had adapted the story into a movie. Bialik claimed that he had been aboard the Eldridge when it disappeared and that he had been brainwashed to forget the event. It was only upon seeing the movie's depiction of the incident that his memories came flooding back. Despite there now being 2 men claiming first-hand knowledge of the test, the idea that it was a hoax continued to dominate discussions about the Philadelphia experiment. For Jessup, however, this turn of events marked a downward spiral in his personal life. He tried to publish more books on the subject of UFOs, but he was unsuccessful and lost his publisher. What led to his death? Was it a case where he ended his life or a foul play? The mysterious death of Morris Jessup. Jessup's investigations into UFOs had now attracted attention from the U.S. military. In 1959, he was found dead in his car from apparent carbon monoxide poisoning, and it was ruled as a case where he ended his life. What incident led to this sudden death? This dude, after writing 4 books, wanted to make a living out of his writings on the subject of UFOs. However, his follow-up books did not sell well, and his publisher rejected several other manuscripts. As if that was not enough, in 1958, his wife left him, and he traveled to New York City. Even his friends described him as being somewhat unstable at the time. Around that time, he traveled to Florida, and when he returned, he was involved in a serious car accident and was slow to recover, apparently increasing his despondency. So, on April 20, 1959, in Dade County, Florida, Jessup's car was found along a roadside with Jessup dead inside. A hose had been run from the exhaust pipe into a rear window of the vehicle, which had filled with toxic fumes when turned on. The death was ruled as a case where he ended his life. Upon hearing the news of his demise, his friends noted that he had been extremely depressed and had discussed ending his life with them several months ago. However, his death would become entangled in more conspiracy theories surrounding the Philadelphia experiment, with some believing that the circumstances of Jessup's apparently ending his life were mysterious. They believed that he was silenced because he researched alien technology and his correspondence with military insiders. However, the only detail that gives us pause is the fact that the car was left in a place where it could attract attention. This situation might suggest that, instead of something suspicious, Jessup secretly hoped that someone would intervene. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened, albeit too late. In fact, in William L. Moore and Charles Berlitz's book, The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility, they put forward the conspiracy theory that his death was connected to his knowledge of the Philadelphia experiment. Some of his friends who were interviewed in the same book opined that the bizarre letters from Carl Allen, which embodied the Philadelphia saga, may have initiated a decline in Jessup's mental state, leading to the eventual ending of his life. Also, what makes the ruling of him ending his life plausible is that in mid-April of 1959, only a few days before his death, he wrote to a friend, New York radio host Long John Nebel, in what Sanderson described as an outright letter to end his life. In it, Jessup proposed that after his death, Nebel stage an on-air seance to contact his spirit. Sabina Sanderson, who saw one of Jessup's letters written in his last days, stated that letter makes it clear that he chose to end his life as the only possible alternative to an insupportable future, and did so after careful consideration. She added, "Certainly the mysterious 'they' had nothing to do with it." The notion that Jessup's death was suspicious gained traction because of his ties to classified information, government officials, and his research into extraterrestrial technology. For those immersed in UFO conspiracy theories, his untimely demise fits the narrative of a man silenced for knowing too much. What marks has Jessup left in the sand of times? Let's find out. The legacy of Morris K. Jessup. Despite his untimely death, Jessup's contributions to the study of UFO phenomena continue to be recognized by those within the ufological community. For Gary Barker, Jessup's death was an opportunity to profit from Jessup's demise. He published his mystery-mongering edited collection, The Strange Case of Dr. M.K. Jessup, in 1963, managing to award Jessup his Ph.D. posthumously. He also wrote a later assessment, The Enigma of M.K. Jessup, in 1971. In 1968, Brad Steiger and Joan Rittenauer wrote a second book. In 1981, Barker's Saucerian Press published another book about Jessup, titled The Jessup Dimension, by Anna Lekens Genslinger. In the book, Genslinger claims to have determined the truth about Jessup's death with the guidance of his ghost, whom she calls Ketch, as a play on Jessup's middle name, Ketchum. As Genslinger thus divined, Morris K. Jessup was the victim of secret government entities who were concerned about his special knowledge of such matters as the Philadelphia experiment. Publisher Barker himself had already launched the legend in ufology, now famously known as the Men in Black, MIB, in his book They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, 1956. The MIB were dark-suited enforcers who leaned on UFO researchers daring to get too close to unspeakable UFO secrets. While stories about Jessup were being published here and there, Allende or Allen, angry that he had received nothing as a result of either the Barker or Steiger title, allowed L.J. Lorenzen, director of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, to interview him in 1969. He stated that his annotations on Jessup's book were part of the hoax, as were his letters to Jessup. Allen subsequently told William Moore that his confession was made in the expectation of financial gain from its publications. However, he later retracted that confession. Gray Barker published a facsimile edition of Jessup's book, containing the annotations, in 1973 through his Saucerian Press. Outro. Do you think that he was silenced because he researched alien technology? Drop your comments in the section below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to get notified whenever we drop inspiring and educational content like this. Thank you for watching, and check out our other videos.